Bullets That Changed America. 13 Historic Assassinations, Duels, Misfires, and Murders. Available from McFarland Publishing, wherever books are sold. Now, back to our show. This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. Tom, what do we got?
Well, today we're going to be looking at a case that I know definitely talked about in history classrooms, particularly when we get to 1920s, the Red Scare and everything like that. And we're going to be looking at the Sacco and Vanzetti trial that took place and eventually led to the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti.
The actual crime for which these guys were accused was 1920. They were put on trial and convicted and sentenced to die in 21. But then they kind of hung out for a while. Hung out is a terrible term. In jail.
Well, there were appeals, right? You had the appeals. You had they try and get a retrial. You had that famous commission with the governor of Massachusetts and everything like that, which eventually held up the court's decision. And then they were eventually executed in 1927.
Yeah, I mean, this thing kind of dragged on for a while. And
there was a lot of debate. There was a lot of protests and stuff like that. There were bombings because of it. There's a lot going on with that.
But this actually was not just in the United States. This was a world-known event. And when I was doing research for this, because actually a nice plug in here, this is actually a chapter in my newest book, Bullets That Changed America. This kind of spreads around the world to other countries, and you have other nations during a 7-year period, these huge demonstrations, even to the point that I think Benito Mussolini gets involved.
Yeah. Well, because they were Italian. Obviously, Mussolini before I guess he was fascist.
No, he's already,
He's not Mussolini. He's not the world war. This is before World War II, obviously. But he's trying to petition for their release or something, saying, listen, they're good Italian Americans. I remember, like you said, it's a time of xenophobia, but it's also a time of they were anarchists. They admitted to being anarchists, and that's really what they were put on trial for in the eyes of a lot of people. And that's really what they were not supposed to be put on trial for. And we'll get to what happened and obviously if they did it or not. But the whole idea of they were anarchists and they were non-apologetic anarchists also.
So let's kind of get into it. Let's talk about the crime itself that propelled these two men to be kind of thrust into the international spotlight. How this still comes up today. I mean, it does. I'm pretty sure in 1970s, the governor of Massachusetts said these guys were unfairly trialed and they should be apologized to. But
that was Dukakis. Go out home, guys, and look up Dukakis. You're going to see the famous picture of him on a tank, and that's pretty much going to be the end. Last time you're going to see anything on Michael Dukakis.
Unbelievable. You are unbelievable, Tom. Anyway. Oh my gosh. Anyway, let's get going on Sacco and Vanzetti.
All right, so you had about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on April 15th, 1920, right? You had a paymaster and his guard. They were actually fired upon by 2 men with pistols. Now, it's important to understand they're pistols, not revolvers. That's going to come up in the trial and stuff like that. And they were carrying 2 boxes containing the payroll for this shoe factory nearby.
Which is crazy, right? Instead of armed vehicles, again, this is 1920.
That's what they did. It's 1920.
They just walk around with...
It had a gun, yeah. It had this big box. And it contained over $15,000, which was a lot of money, especially in 1920.
And one guard, right? One paymaster, one guard.
Yeah. And this was in South Braintree, Massachusetts. So as the murder was being committed, a car containing several other men drew up on the spot, and the murderers threw the 2 boxes in the car, jumped in themselves. The one guard was shot in the chest. Another one was actually the guy, the paymaster, I think, was shot in the back, right, as he was trying to run away. And the car drove away at high speeds across some nearby railroad tracks. And then 2 days later, they actually found the car abandoned in the woods. They said the guard did try to draw his gun, but obviously couldn't get out in time. And then his gun was actually missing. That's something that you see a lot in the trial, that it was missing. So eyewitnesses said they were Italian guys, or they Italian guys with mustaches. And there was actually a similar holdup in a neighboring town of Bridgewater just a few days before. And in both cases, gangs were involved. So that kind of helps out with this too.
And at the time, there's a lot of issues between unions and factory workers and owners and businessmen. This is kind of in class.
There's a class war going on. The haves and have-nots.
Exactly. Huge class war going on, which really leads to a lot of radicalism. And is a lot of these people are kind of denouncing having governments. And they're known radicals. And anarchists believe that government is not helping the situation. The government is actually supporting the wealthy members of society, at the expense of the working class. So these radicals are calling for almost like abolishing government and like
Yeah.
restarting with a more fair union in some way, shape, or
And
form.
I
And
think another thing to note is that they're willing to do that violently if need be.
exactly, right?
With bombings,
Massive
with
violence.
assassinations and stuff like that. So that's another thing too. That's why they go, why would the government care about this? As people say, you don't need government, fine, whatever. But because they're saying, yeah, but it has to be a violent overthrow. Obviously, that's what's getting the government's attention and the
And
police's
actually,
attention.
absolutely. And what these guys are really known for at the time is primarily bombings. I mean, the very infamous Palmer raids,
Palmer,
right?
yeah,
Right, which stems from the American Attorney General, who basically his house gets bombed by anarchist groups, and these guys are sending bombs to known American politicians. Like this is a pretty
politicians,
violent time in America.
embassies, courthouses. Yeah, it's happening pretty regularly.
We know for a fact that Sacco and Vanzetti were actually part of this group. I mean, they were considered these
Yeah,
anarchist fighters. Police officer winds up going to this known anarchist that works at these both factories that were just robbed. He doesn't find him there, but he finds his roommate there. He talks to the roommate, and then they basically start following this roommate. And along with this roommate and this other anarchist, wind up going to a local auto shop to pick up an old car. These two known anarchists show up with two other guys, and those would be Sacco and Vanzetti, right? Nicola, Sacco, and
Bartolomeo. Yeah.
Bartolomeo, Vanzetti. And from that point forward, these guys wind up leaving the shop. The police will kind of follow all of them. They wind up following Sacco and Vanzetti, and they're like, who are these guys?
They boarded a streetcar. They built it, and they were kind of tracked down, and they were arrested. And police detained them, and they were like, "Do you have any guns on you?" They're like, "No, we don't have any guns." But then the police searched them, and they were both found holding loaded pistols.
Which
Yeah, a
was,
32 millimeter Colt model,
yep.
and then a bunch of automatic cartridges, some shotgun shells, a
The
Winchester
shotgun
32,
shells become important, right?
stuff like that.
Because
Yeah,
they're very actually so do the bullets, because apparently the casings and the bullets and the shotgun shells, all the stuff that these guys had was so
yeah.
old and obsolete that it actually made it easier for the police to later identify the same
Because not many
bullets.
people had it. Yeah, the main thing was a 38 caliber Harrington Richardson revolver, which was very similar to the one carried by the one of the Braintree guards.
The
That
one that was
was
shot. Yep.
that was shot and killed, but also his gun was missing. Sacco basically had that gun on him, so they were questioned and stuff like that. They had a whole bunch of anarchist paperwork and flyers and stuff like that on them. The other guy that was detained, also that Orcelli guy, he was actually had an alibi. He was at work both days during the crimes.
Yep.
Sacco had been to work a day of the Bridgewater crime, but he had off on April 15th, the day of the Braintree crime. So he was charged with those murders right on the spot. Vanzetti didn't have any alibis because he was self-employed. He was a fish peddler. He sold eels.
And apparently there's a lot of different, I mean, I will get to in a second, but at the trial, there's a lot of people that saw him sell fish, or actually he sold fish to them supposedly on that day. And they're like, no, he was here selling fish. I bought fish from him. But the issue was that most of these witnesses that were called up to the stand were Italians, and they actually
And
spoke
all,
very
yeah,
heavy like Italian dialects. They couldn't even speak English. But so when they're being put on trial, cross examinations and translators trying to figure this out, and they're like, wait, so how you say? Can you say this in English? And they would say it in English, and they're like, well, but you don't speak English. And they're like, well, I memorized how to say it in English. Oh, so you memorized your
yeah,
deposition? Well, yes. And they're like, oh, okay. There's a lot of essentially discrimination against the fact that these guys, as well as older witnesses, to try to give them alibis, were Italian and also first generation immigrants. So these guys are ultimately arrested. They are put on trial.
Right after they're actually arrested, some of their supporters, fellow anarchists, actually detonated a bomb 2 days later. Supposedly, it was Mario Buddha, that was the one who helped
Yep.
orchestrate the Wall Street bombing. And basically, a time delay bomb packed with heavy iron weights. It was stashed in a horse-drawn cart. It killed 38 people and wounded 134. Think about it. Imagine if something like that happened today by Wall Street, like someone
Yeah.
and they also sent booby-trapped mail to the American ambassador in Paris, wounding his valet. And for the next 6 years, when this trial is going on, bombs were exploded all over the place. American embassies all over the world in protest of what's going on with Sacco and Vanzetti. But they're put on trial. And the big thing to understand the trial is that the judge. So the judge is Webster Tyre, and he is known for not liking immigrants and known for not liking anarchists, even though they said he was a fair trial judge.
And the issue is that Vanzetti and Sacco, specifically Vanzetti, picked the wrong person to represent them.
Oh, that was big too. Yeah, the guy that they picked wound up eventually working with the defense, right?
Yep.
What's his name? John P. Vahi.
That was Sacco's guy. And then Vanzetti also brought in defense attorney Moore, very radical, politicized any form of anarchist beliefs. And he was basically disliked right off the start
Yeah.
because of he was himself kind of radical. It almost went past what the case was really about, which was simply murder, not simply, but it was murder and
Well, it's
theft.
supposed to be a murder case, but it became this case more on anarchy, which is not what they were on trial for.
Yep.
And that's what captures the nation and stuff like that. But like you said, Tupi, absolutely, they had horrible representation.
Yep.
I mean, there's another reason why you can make the argument that whether they were guilty or not is one thing, but that they definitely should have had a retrial. Just based on the judge. Like, I don't think this flies in 2022, a trial like this.
Yep.
With a judge saying this sort of stuff and defense attorneys that have their own agenda. And once the one defense attorney, when Vahey actually goes and works for Katzman's firm, and Katzman is a prosecutor in this case, think about it. The case is over and he goes and works for the opposing counsel's firm right after that.
Yeah, that's a little fishy, right?
That's not going to hold up. That's definitely fishy. So
these guys were put on trial. The trial goes by fairly quickly. They are found guilty fairly quickly, mainly because there's a lot of discrepancies. The first one being that although they testify that they were not there during that time, their alibis are kind of thin, right? So Sacco supposedly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Sacco, was actually had taken off of work to go get himself a passport, right?
yes, that's what they found on him. Yeah.
Right. So they said that he basically left to go to an Italian embassy to get himself a passport. And therefore, because of that, he was not at work. Because they're like, why were you not at work the day of the shooting? And then he goes, no, I was there. I was at the embassy. I was getting a passport. And then I went out and got myself lunch. So they try to figure out who was the person that actually like worked at the embassy that got you your passport. Like, who remembers you? And they finally were able to locate the guy, and the guy was in Italy at the time. It was an older guy in Italy, and he goes, yeah, I remember this guy coming in with a passport. And he goes, I remember it because he had a very peculiar picture, right? The issue was that the picture was large or whatever it is, and it was too big for the passport. So they had to cut it. So they asked this guy, right, well, can you come back to the U.S., go on trial, and basically swear to the fact that you saw him? And he's like, no, I'm too old, and I'm in Italy, and it will take me too long to go back, and blah, 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 I'm already retired. So he never came back. However, he did write a letter stating that, yes, I saw Sacco buying or getting this particular passport on that day.
Yeah, and because of that, it was pretty quickly dismissed. They were just like, yeah, whatever. Because you got to remember, this is 1920. This is before he had like air travel,
Oh, yeah, he would have to get on the ship to
He had to
come,
get on a
right?
boat. I was required 2 ship voyages. He's like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't even know this guy. They can't force him to come back. He's like, like you said, he's retired. He's chilling. He's like, I'll write a letter. Yeah, I remember this guy. But because he wasn't there, because he couldn't be crossed, it kind of was like, didn't really help as much as it possibly could have. And again, the trial focused on a lot of material evidence, not only the bullets.
The issue with the bullets was that they couldn't basically agree whether they were fired from a particular gun, right? Because they brought in gun experts.
So many experts. So many, yeah.
And all the experts were like, yeah, this was definitely fired from this 32 caliber. And then the other expert was like, well, it might not have been. And essentially, even though there was proof that there was, because there was some dissenting views, the judge was like, all right, we can't use this. All experts had something else. And because there was no consensus that these bullets were fired from one particular gun, not the gun that was taken from the guard that was killed, but one of the guns that Sacco and Vanzetti supposedly had themselves, they just couldn't prove that that was indeed the gun. And then they were also like, well, if this guy was fired at 4 times, which he was, how come only one of the bullets inside his body supposedly matches Sacco's gun? So they're like, that would be weird. So like this guy just shot him 4 times, but somewhere in between took out another gun. So like, even if that one bullet matched his gun, it was still only one bullet out of 4 bullets fired into this guy. And the other 3 could not be identified as to which gun they came from. So they're like, this is kind of fishy. But then there's also, witnesses to the crime. There's one particular guy that actually remembers when the getaway car raced past. So there's more people than the Sacco Vanzetti if they did it, right? Because clearly there was a car that came out of nowhere. It was an old Buick that everyone hopped in and they kind of drove away. And one particular guy says that he specifically remembers the car racing right past him. He less than 20 feet away from him. And one of the car's occupants, he said it was Sacco. He's like, this guy pointed a gun at me. Like, I vividly remember him doing that. So we have the gun that belonged to Sacco Vanzetti, the 32 caliber, which potentially might have fired one of the 4 bullets inside the body of the guard. There's also the guard's gun that Vanzetti had on him.
That was found with them, yeah.
Right?
What also hurts them is the fact that they lied. That was brought up repeatedly in the trial, is that when the police originally stopped them, they said, do you have weapons on you? They said no, and they searched them and found loaded guns. And the prosecution kept on bringing up, you lied before, you lied before, you lied before. So how do we know you're not lying now? That was like the big thing that they're like really focusing on also during this trial.
So didn't the prosecution start looking into the actual gun itself, the guard's gun?
Because again, if Vanzetti had it, how did you get that gun? Again, this is a rare gun. There was only about like 30,000 of them in existence.
Yep. I mean,
300,000.
they couldn't
Excuse
find
me.
his serial number because
So,
the serial number was not recorded when he got it. So like they couldn't prove that that was the gun. Like you said, because it was such a hard gun to get. The issue was, well, how did this guy get it, and the other guy has it missing? Like there's that they kind of started really focusing on this gun. Like this has to be the gun that was taken from the scene. Again, was it? Was it not? We really don't know. But we do know, right, that the jury deliberated for 3 hours. Then they went
yeah,
out
they
to
went
dinner.
back. Yeah, when dinner came back, had their decision. So they were just doing it to get a free dinner, get some chicken
Absolutely.
parm. That was it. Yeah.
They come back and they basically say guilty. Verdict is guilty. Porters basically say that Sacco and Vanzetti were convicted not because of a crime they potentially actually committed, but because of the fact that they were anarchists and because of the fact that they were against government and because of the fact that they were immigrants in a world that at the time, the United States, that was amidst the Red Scare and fear of communists, anarchists, anything that would really disrupt the American way of life. And a lot of people to this day really believe that it was the anarchism, really, and the immigration status that played the part in the decision to convict the two men more so than the actual murder.
Than the actual evidence, yeah. And
Right.
because it was first degree murder and felony murder with Vanzetti, that was punishable by death at the time in Massachusetts. They still had the death penalty. So they were bound for execution in the electric chair, basically, unless they had appeals. But that's basically what was going to happen. That's what the judge sentenced them for.
I mean, and they kept on appealing for a while. I mean, these guys were in jail before they were
6 years, yeah.
executed. Yeah, they were in jail for 6 years, so they kept on appealing over and over and over again, and it just kept on being denied each and every time. Wasn't there another confession that came out later? I'm trying to figure this
Well, there
out.
was a confession much later on by another individual that was in jail already. He said no, he's the one that did it, and that it was actually Sacco and Vanzetti were just taking a fall for him, and his name was
Celestino Medeiros or something like
yeah.
that.
So he was going to actually be the one. Yeah, Medeiros. He actually confessed to it. He winds up getting put to death also.
Yeah,
So
yeah, but
I
the
believe the same
judge,
day, but
yeah,
they basically never supported his claim, and they don't think he had anything to do with it. Probably he was just kind of taken. He was just saying that, but the reason some people do believe is that there was another person that was in this gang by the name of Joe Borelli, who looked a lot like Sacco. So they're thinking maybe it was this guy that could have done it. Sacco kind of was taking the fall for it because they look so much alike, but that didn't really come much. So the guy did confess, but there was a lot of other evidence that he was lying too. A lot of affidavits that he couldn't have been the shooter.
so Vanzetti actually wrote that, like, as he's in jail, he's being interviewed, and he writes like, "I will see the death of the judge that put us here," and then he asked fellow anarchists for revenge in our names and the names of our living and dead. Like this guy's inciting violence while he's in
Oh,
prison.
without a doubt, yeah, yeah, and that kind of gets glossed over. I think a lot of times, like, oh, Sacco and Vanzetti, they're just these two Italian guys. It's like, no, they're not Mario and Luigi. Like that's not what these guys are. Not saying they're evil as people. I'm not saying they're saints, but they're definitely not, plumbers.
I can't, Tom. I can't. Where do you come up with this stuff, Tommy? Anyway, execution is scheduled for midnight, August 22nd, 23rd of 1927. On August 15th, so a week before that, a bomb explodes in the home of one of the jurors. This is like a big deal going forward. The protests literally spread around the world when this is
Around the
happening.
world,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, all this happening, and they're putting a lot of pictures out there. Like a lot of them are writing these letters and stuff like that to their kids. There's famous writings about that when Sacco was in jail. His 7-year-old son Dante would stand outside the sidewalk, and they would play catch to each other, like throwing a ball over the wall to each other. And he's writing like letters to his son and stuff like that. And just being like, make sure you be a good man. Always fight for those who are oppressed, because those are going to be your true friends and stuff like that in the world. Help the have-nots. So it comes across as he's really
yeah,
a
like
man of
just
the
throwing a
people.
ball with his son. These are
Yeah,
nice
yeah,
people.
yeah.
These
And
are
he's,
nice
he's
guys.
telling his kid to be nice. He's telling his kids, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. He says, go with your mom and go to the woods and pick wildflowers. So he's being presented as this like family man type of thing, which he might have been. Maybe he was a good father. I don't know. But again, there's a lot of evidence that he might have actually did shoot the postmaster.
Doing research for this, it's very interesting how it's presented. Like when I was looking at the different sources, it's almost like the younger sources, meaning the younger sources that are presented more for the younger crowd, kind of play up this whole like, oh, these guys might have been innocent. And then as you start looking at more serious direct sources or even like government websites, you start to really look at the evidence and realize that perhaps, or rather highly likely, the jury was not incorrect in stating that they were indeed guilty of this crime.
Yeah, the idea is not so much like even when Dukakis says that thing, he just said this and they were treated unfairly. He never said they were innocent.
Yep.
He didn't
Yep.
grant them
Absolutely.
pardons. He just, and that's a big thing too. Right before he's killed, the governor, Governor Alvin T. Fuller, has a chance to pardon them. They write to him. Everyone's writing to the governor. I remember watching a movie about it in like high school or maybe like middle school, like watching a movie about Tuller and whether he thinks or not is Sacco and Vanzetti are guilty or not. And he forms this commission, and they ultimately rule that no, we can't overturn this conviction. Like there's enough evidence to show that they did do it, or they at least had a part of this. And again, that's what this is supposed to be about. The problem is they probably did. They didn't get a fair trial. There's no way you can look at that. And they didn't get a fair trial because they were anarchists. That
Yep.
you can make the argument. Whether or not they did it or not, that's another whole argument that can be made, and that no one's really going to know for sure because there's evidence that kind of supports both ways.
Yep.
That Sacco, and apparently a lot of anarchists did believe that Sacco did commit the murder. That Vanzetti was the getaway driver.
Yep. Also, what's kind of interesting here, there's supposed to be 5 men. They counted 5 men altogether with the car and the actual shooting. What happened to the other 3? You know what I mean? Like, also, why hadn't any of the stolen money ever been found on Sacco Vanzetti? Like, the
Yeah.
money disappeared, and the other 3 out of the 5 were never even brought up in trial, so no one knows. It's like these 2 guys became the face of it. Even though, at the very end, like, Vanzetti, right before he was killed, said, I am innocent of all crimes, not only this, but all crimes. And then Sacco said that I'm never guilty, never, not yesterday, nor today, nor forever. At the end of the day, Sacco and Vanzetti were killed in
Yeah, electric chair.
1927
Yeah.
in an electric chair. And again, to this day, they kind of become, I guess, martyrs, I guess you would say, right?
They definitely became martyrs for the cause and things of that nature, and they're still talked about. And there's, I believe, there's a memorial in Braintree, Massachusetts. There's also a memorial to the victims, also. So, like, we got to remember that people talk about that, but 2 people were murdered,
Yep.
and there were a lot of people were dead and killed after as well the bombing campaign. So there are memorials to that. It's like a major case in U.S. history, and it definitely focuses on like this whole like the Red Scare kind of sums it up like whether or not they did it or not, whether or not they were guilty or not, they were put on trial more for their views, not for the crime they're being put on trial for.
Yep.
If that
And
makes
I think
sense.
that, that is supposed to shine some light on the United States erratic and almost unfair policies during this crazy odd time of the Red Scare and xenophobia.
I would encourage everyone to go look it up themselves. Draw your own opinions on it. Do you think they were both involved? They weren't involved? One or the other. And there's a ton of evidence out there. Like you said, you're going to find different ones based on different websites that you look at.
Yeah, and it's always the point is to give you guys a nice introduction. So that's that. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Always a pleasure. If you need to contact us, you could find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. Please, we welcome any comments, questions, or anything else you guys might have towards us. So, everyone, have an awesome week, and we'll see you guys next week.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.